Final Stop Brasil, Chapter 13. Play with Fire, Violent Rape. I probably would have followed the example of my sisters, would have eventually married Michael, and had remained as a frustrated housewife and mother in this small town. But it turned out quite differently. The following spring we made our first-class trip. On the resort island of Just in the North Sea, a small island we could cross walking in one day. Therefore, there were only 2 cars on the island. One belonged to the island doctor and the other to the pastor. The public transports were horse-drawn carriages. I only had eyes for the horses. Then the girls made me aware of the good-looking carriage driver, who did not take his black piercing eyes from me. Joe looked smashing, with his tan skin and black hair, absolutely not like a typical German North Sea islander. For the girls, he was the absolute heartthrob, and there was no other topic. We lost no opportunity to go with Joe's coach in the city, even though our teacher constantly warned not to spend all our pocket money on carriage rides, because to walk into the city took only 20 minutes. Joe, who was about in his mid-20s, made no secret of the fact that he was only interested in me. So I had to listen to slogans like, "Rita, you always get all the best guys." But when he took the first opportunity to make clear to the other girls he wanted to be alone with me, nobody was really angry with me. On the contrary, for the girls, this romance was a welcome change. Michael was forgotten, and I met as many times as possible with Joe. But apart from tender kissing and touching, nothing happened. When my teacher found out about this, I had to listen to some story of him. "Rita, this is a grown man and not a boy. I'm responsible for you, and if something happens and you become pregnant, I am going to lose my job. You will not meet this Joe again. If you are ignoring this, I am compelled to grant house arrest on you." Sure, I got house arrest, although the girls lied for me. But when the housekeeper who was to watch me thought I was in the girls' dorm, I was already long gone out of the window. My teacher was mad at me and glad when the last evening came. Outside it was raining in torrents. Joe came by with his coach and stopped just outside the building, then went on slowly. I stood with the girls at the window, and my friends hugged me and whispered to me, "With our return, everything will be over anyway." But not everyone was so friendly-minded towards me. After our return, someone had nothing better to do than to tell Michael about my cheat on him. That was the end for us, even though I asked him for forgiveness, but for Michael it was unforgivable. He punished me by starting something with almost every girl at our school, just to hurt me. For me it was very hard, because I lost the only support and security I had in my life. Out of nowhere reappeared Rainer, who had never given up trying to go out with me. However, I changed and became a wild rebel. I did not let my parents, who abused me and gave me all the blame for the breaking up between me and Michael, tell me anything anymore. I ran from home and spent Saturday nights together with Dagmar in the neighboring town, getting there by hitchhiking. There we went to a disco where black music was played. Every time we were surrounded by a group of guys, about 20 years old, who sometimes took us with them to their homes to have private parties. There was always plenty of alcohol and lots of petting. Dagmar had her eyes on a guy who called himself Sweet, a young man with long blonde hair. He, however, was interested in me, and also I had no ambitions Tensions developed between Dagmar and me, but they were forgotten when I met Lucky in the disco, a pitch-black Moroccan. Dagmar wanted to keep me from dancing with him. "Are you crazy, Rita? A Negro?" It did not interest me, and I spent nights with him on the dance floor. We danced together close, kissing, and it excited me a lot to feel his stiff penis rubbing on my body. We could not even communicate with each other because he spoke no German. There was only the body language. For me it was nothing more than an exciting game, and I could spend hours to entertain my other friends who were afraid to leave our dump with my stories. The hot summer afternoons I spent with friends in the public outdoor pool and flirted like hell with lots of guys. At 13 years of age, I could really compete with older girls, and did not even stop when the object of my desire already had a girlfriend. With Harald, a classmate, I got into trouble because he caught me petting with Sadeti, the Turkish boyfriend of his sister. Sadeti was a great temptation for me with his racy looks and his super body. It excited me when we were lying on my bath towel, he on top of me, kissing me wildly. Again and again he begged me to be his girlfriend. Then he would immediately finish with Veronica, he promised. But since Michael, there was no one with whom I would have seriously started something. For me it was just an exciting game. A few weeks later, Sadeti and Veronica were killed in a car accident due to speeding. Sadeti had always been a fast car driver. At my home, as far as one could still call home, I had become the black sheep of the family, and was the main subject of the gossip, but that interested me very little. I became completely stubborn when my parents beat me. I didn't talk to them for weeks, not even looked at them. Finally, they stopped to beat me. Slightly, I became aware of Elke's marriage plans. The favorite daughter of my parents, however, avoided, much to their liking, a white wedding and a big celebration. To get married is pretty stupid, I now thought. Somewhere my dream had gone lost. This summer I refused to go with my parents to the Baltic Sea. I would have loved to see my grandma again, but not with my parents. Instead, I stayed home and celebrated with friends one party after another. And since no one else was available, Rainer was again at my side. One night I provoked him to sleep with me. Until then I was still a virgin, but I found that it was high time to lose my innocence. Rainer refused to do anything because he reckoned both of us not yet mature enough. "Are you too young for me? I can't do anything with you. I'm going to find me a real man," I mocked him. Rainer was upset and left me. I didn't see him for a long time again. The summer passed and it grew colder again. As autumn temperatures were already so low that nothing brought me outside as always, Dagmar came by to pick me up and take me to one of our Saturday trips to the neighboring city. "Please come back again next spring, will you? In this cold, I'm not going to stand on the streets to hitchhike," I told her, laughing. Any persuasion failed. I stayed stubbornly at home, and Dagmar left angry. But contrary to my assumption she would return home, she hitchhiked alone and met in our regular disco the group of guys we always met. As I learned later, they took her with them to one of their apartments. There she was raped by all of them who were there. All the guys took their turn to abuse her. The most brutal one of all, who, to make things worse, rammed empty bottles into her vagina, was Sweet. When I saw Dagmar again, she was no longer the same person. Her face covered in bruises and lacerations. So was her body. But I knew from experience that the emotional injuries were much deeper, and the fear and agony. But the real torment she suffered that I didn't know. Shortly afterwards, Dagmar was sent far away by her parents to Bavaria. We didn't see each other for a few years, but we wrote letters on regular basis. About a year later, she met an American and fell in love. Later, she got married to him. Once again, I lost someone and withdrew myself into my shell. I stopped going anywhere and certainly avoided that disco of the neighboring city. Only the little war with my parents went on without interruption. My father was raging when I listened to my records of George McRae, Jackson 5, Isaac Hayes in full volume. "Turn off that nigger music or I'll throw away the crap." Recently, my mother woke me even if I wanted to sleep longer on Sundays. She woke me up early to send me to church. As an evangelical, she went on with the religious tradition of the confirmation, of the second baptizing with my sisters. And now it was my turn. My father, who was actually a Catholic, but had long resigned from the church, remained aloof from this issue. I believed I already did enough when it came to religion, as I studied the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. This resulted in numerous questions, doubts, and contradictions, which no one could or wanted to explain to me. Even the pastor didn't, but I surely went to stress his nerves every Tuesday during the confirmation class with my questions. I saw little sense in all this and didn't like the church, this cold, cheerless place, anyway. Praying I could also do at home. The only reason why I tried to hold out this year and a half was the prospect of lucrative gifts for my confirmation. Around the same time I started my first working practical experience, which means that the school sent the pupils out for 8 weeks to a certain working place to achieve experience and decide what to do in the future. I started it in the toy department of the little shopping center in our town, where my mother worked in the restaurant. First, it was an advantage for me because I was allowed to eat free lunch at the restaurant, and often I met friends there too. However, I found the way my mother worked embarrassing. Overambitious as she was lurking on everybody who had just about the last bite in his mouth to clear away the dishes. Sabine joked one day, "To eat here in peace you have to secure the plate." The work in the toy department was fun. Unfortunately, this fun was soon to be spoiled for me. The department manager, an old horny gimp, tried to get close to me whenever he could and really got on my nerves with his behavior. But that wasn't all. He never missed a chance to touch my breasts or grab between my legs. He waited on me in the storage, and if he had the chance he caught me in a corner from where I wasn't able to escape, pushed himself close to me and tried to kiss me. His bad breath was disgusting, and in general all this harassment. This time I swore I would not keep my mouth shut and told my mother. "We need to report him to the police," I demanded. But if I believed that my mother was on my side, I was once again completely wrong. The fear of my mother to lose her job made her tell me not to make a scandal out of it. "But this monster must be stopped. Who knows to how many girls he's still going to do this?" I protested. But my mother didn't want to hear any of it, and yelled at me instead to shut up. Reluctantly, I did, but went to the doctor to get a sick note for the remaining time. This, however, killed the last spark of feeling I had ever felt for my parents. More out of spite or to hurt my parents, I began an affair with Hartmut, a 19-year-old roofer. After a week, he took me to his home to introduce me to his family, which was quite nice and friendly. What I immediately noticed was that they often liked to celebrate with lots of alcohol. But I didn't condemn anyone for it. Hartmut took me to his room, where I finally lost my innocence. I liked Hartmut, but that was all there was to it, and the first time was anything but nice or romantic. No great feelings, only a little pain. But Hartmut had a complete collection of various condoms, and so I was at least protected against pregnancy. And the sex was becoming better every time, because I learned a lot from Hartmut. We went across his entire collection of condoms, with and without studs, stripes, with strawberry or cherry flavor, and so on. So I did begin to like it. My parents totally freaked out when they learned who I was knocking about with. In their eyes, Hartmut's family was antisocial. I wondered what that meant, however antisocial. Hartmut's family lived in a settlement of the so-called lower social class, but their apartment was much larger than the small two-room flat of my parents. Moreover, they were better equipped and more modern than we were. Both parents worked, and Hartmut and his sister and brothers lacked nothing. Suddenly, I even existed back for my oh-so-good sisters. My God, Rita, keep away from these people. The family is widely known, and Hartmut is a drunkard. Unfortunately, they were right in this case. Initially, he pulled himself together, but more often he really got drunk, which brought us to arguing. It disgusted me, but I stuck with him. A week before my confirmation, when we were at a party with Hartmut's friends, I collapsed with severe abdominal pain. Already weeks before, I complained of recurrent severe colic, but only heard the usual thing my mother was always saying. "Oh, that's nothing. It will go away again. Stop making a fuss." She accused me of just making an excuse not to go to school or to church. Hartmut's mother asked me to lie on my back and pull my legs towards my body. As I did so, I screamed in pain. "This is the appendix. You immediately need to go to the hospital," she diagnosed spontaneously. One of Hartmut's friends put me into his car and took me there together with Hartmut. The doctor in the emergency room confirmed it was an acute appendicitis and stated that he needed to operate immediately. So he asked for the phone number of my parents because I was only 14 years old and he therefore needed their consent. When they arrived and saw Hartmut at my side, the chaos was perfect. My father gave the impression as if he wanted to commit a murder at any moment, and my mother was crying, but not for me. She already saw the confirmation ceremony go down the drain. All the ordered cakes, the expensive dress, all in vain. But that was not the end of the excitement. While I was recovering from the surgery in a room I shared with an old lady, Hartmut, drunk as he was, rushed in. The nurses rushed in the room behind him to kick him out, whereupon Hartmut pulled out a gas pistol. The old woman almost had a cardiac attack in terror as doctors and police came into the room, followed by my parents who wanted to visit me. Everyone screamed and shouted at the same time, and I was looking for a hole to sink in. One day before my confirmation, I got a visit from the pastor. Was he going to give me the extreme unction? No, he just told me that he had obtained from the doctor my early release. I was spared nothing. My mother dragged me to a hairdresser who fixed for me the same ugly hairstyle as she had. Apparently he didn't know another one. I survived the ceremony relatively without harm, as I neither had to kneel nor stand up or answer any questions from the catechism. There was peace and joy, and I got plenty of money and other gifts. The front door had not even entirely closed behind the last guest when I hissed to my mother, "That was the last time that you sent me to church," and went to wash my hair to appear normal again. A week later, Hartmut and I made a trip with his moped. On the way back, after a walk in beautiful weather, Hartmut was going at a fairly high speed and took the curves very rapidly. In the final corner before my unconsciousness, I shouted, "Slow down!" He overestimated himself and we flew out of the curve. My life was saved by the helmet I wore, because I was flying several meters and then slammed my head on the road. When I came back, I was in the emergency room, looked at the same doctor whom I knew from my last hospital stay. Clasping his hands above his head, he explained in horror. "You again! Girl, what are you doing? The appendix scar has not yet been healed, and you climb on a moped." Then he had to notify my parents. I was very lucky. The appendix scar was still intact. Only I had some abrasions on my face, my knees were open and bleeding, and on my left hand I had a cut to be stitched up. Patched up and stitched together, my parents were allowed to take the wayward child back home, where I had to listen again that I'm just giving them worries and grief. Defiantly I answered, "I didn't ask to be born." To spare them even more worries, my mother dragged me to the gynecologist, who prescribed me the pill, because all the insults, curses and threats were of no avail. I stayed with Hartmut. Not out of love, rather out of compassion and the feeling that I couldn't leave him alone with his alcohol addiction. Despite everything, it went rapidly downhill with him. The accident hit him harder than me, because in addition to his broken bones, even the moped was gone. He also lost his job and fell out with his parents, who sent him out of the house. I was with all these problems quite helpless and could do nothing. Hartmut moved into a furnished room in another town, about 70 kilometers away. My hope that he might get a grip on himself was destroyed when I caught him there during a visit that he now had started to drink in the morning. For me it was very complicated to reach there with a bus, because every time I had to wait up to 2 hours for a connecting bus. So I started to hitchhike again. That way I moved along much faster. When I told Hartmut about it, he raged that it was too dangerous to get alone into strange cars. Stubborn, I shouted at him, "Who then moved so far away? If you don't like it, I won't come at all. Perhaps it's better anyway." He relented and gave me his gas pistol, with the words, "Then take this at least always with you." And actually it protected me twice, as crazy motorists drove with me to a forest area. The first time I took the pistol out of my handbag without batting an eyelash, and took aim at the driver's head. He then let me get out without difficulties. But I had quite a way to run back to the road, which made me very angry. So I changed my tactics, as this happened to me a second time. I let the driver bring me back to the road, and only there I left the car. I was totally unaware of the danger I put myself in. But on the other hand, these men surely did not expect this angel face carrying a weapon, nor could they know whether it was a sharp one or just a gas pistol. The stress at home was perfect, as I forgot one morning to take the pistol out of my bag and put it into my school bag. Normally, I always did it because I knew my nosy mother always sniffing around in my things. And promptly she found the thing too, and met me already at the door. I feared the worst. She abused me as a criminal and threatened to give me to a home. The trouble continued until my father came home at night. He too roared and shouted loudly, without giving me the slightest chance of an explanation. Eventually, I had enough and shouted back, "Then bring me in a home. I don't care, but the pistol is a gas pistol and I have it for my protection." The evening ended with my mother taking away the pistol and my front door key, so I could not unlock the door, which was in fact closed for me during the next 3 weeks. House arrest. The end between me and Hartmut was rather unspectacular. The next time I went to see him, I found him in a miserable state. He was suffering from heavy withdrawal syndromes, because he had no more alcohol in the house, and no longer was able to go and buy some. "Stop with that shit booze, and let yourself be treated. If you go on like this, you'll drink yourself to death." I tried to convince him. Yes, he would stop, he promised, but now he urgently needed alcohol, and I should get it for him. When I refused, he screamed and shouted I didn't want to help him. "You don't want any help, and I'm not ready to let you pull me down together with you." So I shut not only the door behind me, but the chapter with Hartmut. 6 months later, he committed suicide. Despite all the stress that I constantly had at home, I had been ambitious and studied for school as well as for classworks. I had a clear goal in mind and specific ideas about what I wanted to do in my future. I wanted to study psychology and go into some form of social work, perhaps work on drug treatment or something like that. In school, we often discussed social focal points with our teachers. Our class teacher praised me as an intelligent, reasonable, and for my age a very mature girl. Due to my arguments, especially when it came to social issues or politics. He liked me very much, as long as we were inside school, but on any school trips I had become a nightmare for him. During a visit at the zoo, he had to tear me forcefully away from the fences at the aquarium of the crocodiles, before they tore my hand off, which I had put inside to test out how fast these animals were. Another time, while we were traveling by ship, I felt seasick and rushed onto the deck to vomit without being aware that I stood at the wrong side. My teacher came rushing to take me to the other side, but unfortunately it was already too late and we both ended up messy. Now another school trip was planned. The last one before the regular school ended or would be changed to a secondary one. My teacher took me aside to warn me, "Rita, this time, behave yourself. No stories with men or anything like that. And no boiled eggs into the mouths of sleeping people." With my most innocent face, I looked at him as if I didn't know what he was talking about. The trip went to Würzburg in Bavaria. In the first 2 days I was a real good girl, but on the city tour my friends and I paid much attention to the traditional Boxbeutel. These are bottles with a fat belly and a short slender neck, so they do actually look like bags, which are filled with the wine produced in Würzburg. In our free time, of course, we tried a few varieties of Boxbeutel and returned staggering into our accommodation. Besides the headache we all had the next day, we also had to listen to the referendum of our teacher. "It was obvious that you were among them, Rita." He straightened himself with a reproachful look at me. The next night, we girls sneaked inside the dormitories of the boys, and while the girls stood lookout, I filled the open mouths of the sleeping boys with toothpaste. It was a good laugh when the boys all ran in the bath vomiting. The home in which we stayed was very large and accommodated not only us, but also many classes from other schools. My girlfriends were particularly interested in the guys from one graduating class. 2 of them were the main object of their desire, Thomas and Hansi. Thomas was a typical playboy who knew that he was handsome and took advantage of this. Hansi, however, was shy, but with his long blonde hair and dreamy brown eyes, he was like a magnet for the girls. Both of them played guitar, and who doesn't find that romantic? It couldn't have been hidden from me that Hansi were giving me again and again furtive glances. And on the 3rd day he found the courage to invite me for a walk. I accepted. From that time on he never left my side. Mostly we were 4 of us, for Sabine, Claude, Thomas. Those 2 were with their humor unbeatable and fit well together. This time the other girls were actually mad at me because once again I snatched away an object of desire. Well, my teacher was also less than enthusiastic. "Rita, this is the graduating class and the boys 18 years old. Please don't give me another problem. He admonished me. The class came from Oerkentrick, a suburb of Recklinghausen, center of the Ruhr area, center of the coal mines. My interest in Hansi was not exactly bubbling over, but everything that could broaden my horizon made me curious. So I exchanged addresses and phone numbers with him when the class trip was coming to an end. I hardly arrived at home when the phone rang already, and of course it was Hansi. My father raged, "Is that starting all over again?" And "What guy is this now again?" So I had to jump to be the first on the phone, because usually it was for me anyway. My parents hardly ever received calls. And who would ever call them? They hardly had any friends. If my father was first on the phone, he slammed the receiver back on the telephone if he heard on the other end a male voice asking for me. But Hansi would not be much impressed by this and called me 2 or 3 times a week, in addition to the letters he sent me. 1 month after we met, Hansi and Thomas announced their visit. Both came with their bicycles. The route, driven by car, in 1.5 hours, they made it by bicycle in 6 hours. The entire school greeted the two as heroes, and so much effort it actually made me a little proud of him. Even my parents were impressed about Hansi, who neither smoked nor drank, with his polite, restrained way. They became suddenly very tolerant and allowed me to spend my autumn holidays at Hansi's home. Not only this, my father himself brought me there. We always had good fun because Thomas was accompanying us most of the time. But Hansi's mother saw in me the great danger of losing her son, and made me constantly aware of her jealousy. If I wanted to help her in the kitchen, she refused. She didn't like it if I touched anything. Hansi's father was exactly the opposite. He was really very nice and cordial, but unfortunately a very sick man with a lung disease from working in the coal mine for decades before he was sent into early retirement. With Hansi's brother and his girlfriend as well as Hansi's friends, I had no problems. I got along fine with everyone, and we always had some kind of action. From this time on, I hardly ever spend a weekend at home anymore. Instead, I made trips with Hansi and his parents to Belgium, where we took a romantic boat trip in the underground lakes of limestone caves in Koo. Or we went to watch car races in Spa. Another time we undertook a 2-day bike tour along with Hansi's clique with overnight camping. The Christmas holidays we spent with the gang at Innsbruck in Austria. A caravan of 3 cars with camping equipment. It was terribly cold, but the scenery, the snow-covered Alps, and the typical country house hotel was a rewarding sight. For me, it was the first time that I used a cable car and a chairlift. But instead, like all other tourists who populated with the alpine ski equipment, we slid down the steep hills with plastic bags under the butt. That was great fun. In the restaurant we enjoyed typical rustic tasting food, and outside in front of the camp, sitting at the sparkling fire, the guys were playing on their guitars, which of course could not be missed. However, at this point the fun stopped for me. I did not see why I should be out there freezing in a tent, when only a few meters away a comfortable warm hotel bed was available. This led to quarrel between me and Hansi, because he showed no understanding for my attitude. Big-headed, I left the tent and walked to the hotel to rent a room for myself. But I couldn't even think of sleeping, because one by one Hansi's friends knocked on my door so that I could sleep in their sleeping bags on the floor. In the morning, the rest came to take at least a hot shower. Only Hansi remained stubborn, and the return was a tensed up between us. I already doubted that our relationship would last long, because every time I was alone with Hansi, he was just boring. Furthermore, our interests were too different. When I met Hansi, he was still a virgin. This had changed very soon, though. But the sex with him had no flavor at all. It was just plain. Furthermore, Hansi began, very unlike me, to make plans for the future, and often mentioned that his parents' house was big enough for all of us to live very well there. He didn't seriously think I would move into this gloomy mining town. At almost 15 years of age, I forged very different plans. Another thing I didn't like at all was that my parents now turned up often for coffee at Hansi's parents, and that both sets of parents had such a well understanding. More than once I witnessed that the marriage of the children was discussed, and felt like in the middle of an Arabian camel trading. Full of panic, I withdrew myself from Hansi and spent the weekends back at home again. When Hansi called me on the phone, I made excuses to end the conversation as quickly as possible. I was simply tired of him, and rather went out with my friends again, hanging around. But most of all, I studied for a good school qualification, because I wanted to study in any case. Once again, the relationship to my parents was very tense. They didn't like at all how I behaved towards Hansi, and apparently it crossed their plans. My mother showed solidarity with Hansi when he poured out his heart to her over the phone. All this made me sick. So I made it clear, once and for all, that I wasn't thinking of any marriage plans, but that I wanted to study. My father started to shout. If I ever thought about who was going to pay for the studies. He wouldn't anyway. He didn't see a point in paying for university if I, as a girl, would get married sooner or later and have children. For him it was just like throwing money out the window. You're going to make an apprenticeship and that's enough. This was his last word. And there was nothing that would change it, not even my teacher, to whom I confided. One evening he came home to talk to my parents, trying to convince them. Your daughter is exceptionally intelligent, which is proved by the school certificates as well. She also has an exceptional sense for social concerns. It would be a shame not to support this, but it was no use, and without the consent of my parents, I could not attend secondary school. Wanting or not, I had to find a place to make my apprenticeship. With my good school certificates, I found one quickly, as an industrial clerk in a bolts and nuts factory. For the rest of the remaining school time, I had lost all motivation. I was more absent than anything else, preferring instead going to this new Greek restaurant in the city center. And I was not only fascinated by the strange food and the music, but mainly by the handsome Greek men, which logically were guests there. Yanni, the boss, liked me very much. He knew that I was a poor student and gave me meals for free, and each time an aromatic and strong Greek coffee. and soon others took over to pay the bill for me, because everybody liked me a lot. I thought of the Greek men not only as beautiful, I also liked the way they treated women. The most I liked to be invited by Simi. We went for drives in his car, or he invited me to the movies. But I withdrew myself from him after an ugly scene of jealousy. It was embarrassing that I knew his girlfriend, the granddaughter of my godmother, and after I witnessed how she was actually fighting with his second girlfriend, I finally evacuated the field. Also, for me, the issue Hansi had long been settled. It was not so for my parents. They still tried to mend what not was to be mended. Hansi continued to come for visits on the weekends, but I treated him ice cold to make clear that I did not ask him to come. My parents even allowed him to sleep with me in the living room, but contrary to his hopes, nothing happened. As it got warmer, the spring fair was held in our city like every year. I was pleased not only about the caterpillar, a high mountain and valley carousel, and the bumper cars, but even more about the fair helpers, who I knew all personally. They would let me use the rides for free. Every time they came to our town, I and my friends had some harmless flirts and kissing with them, but they never stayed more than a week. This time I was invited by one of them, Rita, for a drink on Saturday. He asked me to wait until his work was finished. At midnight, we went to a bar where we drank some whiskey cola. He asked me if I would like to accompany him in his trailer. Sure I did. Never before was I in one of the caravans of the fairground, and was surprised how cozy they were inside. We slept together, and for the rest of the night I stayed in the arms of Rita. But back at home expected me a huge thunderstorm. "What do you think you're doing, staying out all night, hanging around with somebody? And Hansi sits alone at home. Are you not feeling ashamed?" "No," was all I thought, and snapped back. "If it has escaped you, the topic of Hansi is done for me." Of this my mother didn't want to hear anything, and so I was given house arrest again. To make things very clear now for everybody, I sat down and wrote a letter to Hansi in which I asked him to accept that it was over and he should stop calling my parents. Suddenly my mother came like a fury into the room and wanted to know what I was doing. Without waiting for an answer, she took the letter and read it. Outraged, she put it in her apron pocket and snarled at me, "If you still feel like this in 3 weeks, you can send it. Until then, you have time to think." With hateful eyes, I replied, "If you think that something is going to change, then you are mistaken." That same Sunday evening, I found in the living room cupboard a bottle of liquor. I found the stuff awful. Therefore, I went to the kitchen and took a bottle of Fanta out of the fridge without giving my parents the slightest glance. With this, I drank myself to the brink of unconsciousness. The only thought in my head, "You won't lock me up anymore." And when my mother had a look what I was up to, drunk as I was, had been already with one leg out of the attic window. That was the last time my parents dared to give me house arrest. From then on, they let me do what I wanted, and I did.